רישרו של המים ברק השמיים תפילת האדם החול והים רישרו של המים ברק השמיים תפילת האדם. O Lord my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, Hachol ve'hayam, rishru shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, tfilat ha'adam. Good afternoon, and welcome to Temple Bethel, one of the many spiritual homes of Barry Tishler. I'm Cantor Elon Davidson, and it has been my honor to be one of Barry's spiritual guides, if you will, throughout the latter part of his life, and be one of his clergy. These words that I opened with by Chana Senish remind us of how we must always fight until the very end to keep things going. And we are here today to celebrate the life of a man who embodied those words. For he truly did pray fervently and often that these things would never end. He fought so that he could be here for you, Ellen, and Brittany Page, and Brad. He fought these past 4 months so that we would not be sitting here today. But alas, death has taken our beloved Barry Tishler. And we are here because our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence, there is lamentation, and in their tears, there is loneliness, but there is also love. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of all of these loving friends. O God, hear them and be with them. For Barry's love that united us in life and which death cannot sever, for his companionship that we all shared along life's path, and which continues through the tenderness of memory, for the gifts of his heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness and is now a precious remembrance. For all these and more, God, we give our thanks to you. In this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures that brings us the ever-new message of God's nearness. It tells us of our kinship with the Creator, in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. As I turn to Psalm 15, I must believe that the psalmist knew Barry Tishler when he wrote these words. And as I share them with you, I hope that you too can visualize how he embodied these words in his life. Adonai, mi yagur be'ohalecha, mi yishkon behar kodshecha. Adonai, who may abide in your house? Who may dwell in your holy mountain? Those who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts, who do not slander others or wrong them or bring shame upon them, who scorn the lawless but honor those who revere God, who give their word and come what may, do not retract, who do not exploit others, who do not take bribes. Those who live in this way shall never be shaken. In a moment, we will share the familiar words of the 23rd Psalm, which you can find in the prayer books in the seatbacks in front of you on page 576. I will warn those of you who are not accustomed to a Hebrew prayer book that they open from right to left. Some people say they open the wrong way. Those of us here say they open the right way. Before we share these familiar words that you will find at the bottom of page 576, a word about this psalm. I am often asked, why is it that Psalm 23 has become so familiar to us at this difficult time, in times of death and mourning? There is, of course, the obvious answer that God is our shepherd, and God shepherds us through life and guides us along life's journey. But perhaps the less obvious answer, and the one that resonates so strongly with me at all times, is that when we read this description of how God shepherds us and guides us, I invite you to interpolate Barry's name in all of those places, and to think about how he embodied the divine in his lifetime, how he embodied these words guiding you, leading you along life's path, restoring your souls, making sure that you wanted for nothing in your lives. For he was always there when you needed him, just a phone call away. So as we read these words now at the bottom of 576, I invite you to take them to heart, perhaps as the psalmist wrote them, or to interpolate and interpret the way that Barry embodied these words. A psalm of David. Adonai is my shepherd, I lack nothing. God makes me lie down in green pastures. God leads me to water in places of repose. God renews my life. God guides me in right paths as befits God's name. Though I walk through a valley of deepest darkness, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You spread a table before me in the full view of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My drink is abundant. Only goodness and steadfast love shall pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of Adonai for many long years. In his sorrow, Job cried out, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, yehi shem Adonai mevorach. God has given, God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. An ancient people, we are well acquainted with grief and with the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us. Yet the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave, and that there is strength in faith. With Job we say, Adonai natan, God, you have given. You gave us a loved one who will not be forgotten. For all that was good and enduring in his life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. Adonai lakach, God, you have taken away. We pray for the strength to turn our broken hearts into an altar of trust before which we acknowledge your sovereignty and love. As we now say, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevorach, blessed be the name of God, now and forever. This past week, as we were reading our weekly portion of Torah, we began to read of the beginning of the end of the life of Moses. Moses, who lived 120 years, we are taught, and whose life can be easily divided in thirds. The first 40 years, if we believe what DreamWorks teaches us, he was a prince of Egypt. The second 40 years, he was a shepherd in the desert with his father-in-law Jethro, the Midianite priest. And not until he was 80 years old did he receive his life's work for which he would be known through all eternity. For it was in those last 40 years that he freed the Jews from Egypt, that he was God's spokesman, and in those last 40 years that he wandered with us in the desert as we received the law and learned what it would be to be a free people. The life of Barry Tishler, oddly enough, can also be divided roughly in thirds. He was born October 4th, 1936, in the holy city of New York, to Joseph and Ida. He had a happy childhood with his sister Karen, with his dad, who was a doctor, and his mom, a teacher, and their granny, who lived with them to take care of the household and the children, because it wasn't common in those days, but he had two working parents. He was always inspired by his father and his father's work, and soon enough knew that he too wanted to become a doctor. In fact, he would go out on house calls with his dad in New York City. I'm sure that that made his dad very proud and perhaps his dad's patients a little nervous. His mom would read to him The Consummate Teacher every night as he ate peanuts. And he grew up an all-around athlete and mostly a good boy, except for that one time that he was sent home from summer camp for being found in the girls' cabin. Now, it wasn't what you're all thinking. It was his sister's cabin, and that's why he was there. But I know where all of you went. When he came home, he was punished deeply by his father. You see, Barry was a great sports fan, and he loved going to all the sports games that his father would take him to. And his father told him, well, you're not going to be able to go to the Yankees game with me today because you misbehaved and got sent home from camp. But he still invited his son Barry to go for a walk with him down to Yankee Stadium. And Barry, I'm sure, thought that this was a sign that his father would forget about the punishment until they got to the gates of Yankee Stadium, and his father said, "This is where you stop and I enter." Barry never forgot that lesson for as long as he lived. He was a smart young man, highly intelligent, graduating from high school at the age of 16 and attending Dartmouth College to study zoology. He continued after Dartmouth to New York Medical College, during which he also started a family. Brad will speak a little bit about his dad in those early days, and perhaps about some of the challenges of being a young man who wanted to get married. And while his marriage may not have worked out, he always dedicated himself to keeping up with his son, Brad. And Brad's presence here is a testament to that, to the love of a father and his son. Brad looked up to his dad when Barry was in the Army and followed in his father's footsteps, enlisting himself and making the Army his career later in life. By the time Barry took his medical boards, he was building his second family and wanted to get out of the cold. He had had enough of the chilly state of New York. So he took his boards in 3 states. Of course, New York, Florida, and California. Passing all 3 of those boards, he did end up taking a job right here in San Pedro as a partner with Dr. Berglund, OBGYN. He moved out here with his family with only $500 in his pocket, but became very successful immediately, no doubt related to his personality and his dedication to all of his patients. You see, being married to an OBGYN is a tough thing in life. For Barry's first partners were always, it seemed, his patients and his work. And that sometimes is a tough nut to swallow for people. And so this second marriage also did not work out. But what worked out for him was this place, and all of you who are here as testament to the respect that he had, that he earned here in San Pedro for his dedication at all hours, every day. Not a lot of time taken off. Still to the very end of his life. I remember having conversations with Barry often saying, "Barry, don't you think it's time to retire?" And that's exactly how he responded. He would laugh and he would say, "But there are still babies to deliver. And I love it. And I need to do it." He still tried to keep in touch with his 3 children, as busy as he was, and Brad remembers flying out to visit him some summers here in LA and flying to New York to see him when he was visiting his family. Even with such a thriving practice and friends all around him, 55 was too young to be single and alone. So he finally listened to some of his partners and friends, who, by the way, weren't Jewish but knew that he was, and told him, "You know what, Barry, what you need is a nice Jewish girl." And so he put an ad in the Jewish Journal, and through that ad met Ellen. And she seemed to understand right away the rigors of an OBGYN and respect that. She actually quite liked her independence as well, and that time that they would be apart, but they enjoyed and loved the time that they spent together. She was so willing, in fact, to date this OBGYN that she was willing to have her very first date be at the cafeteria of Torrance Hospital. Lucky for her, Barry moved that date to the Chart House in Marina del Rey. Perhaps it was lucky for him. Ellen was a bit nervous about dating him after he had been rather verbose about his entire past, his life, his marriages, his children, his work. But his humor and his smooth demeanor won a second date. Their dates were always adventurous, albeit not always timely. You see, Ellen was never ready on time. And Barry would come and ring the bell at her apartment building, and she would let him in, and then she would go and get ready. Barry was also meticulous, as we all know. And Ellen, maybe not so much. So while Barry would wait for his date, he would often do the dishes, clean out the refrigerator, and clean the apartment. Barry did love his escapes to West LA. They were almost like mini vacations for him. But I think that any time that Barry could escape to be with Ellen felt like a vacation to him. In 1996, they found a rabbi to marry them in Las Vegas, returned here to Palos Verdes, a month later to have a reception with friends at Barry's house in PV, and eventually, Ellen finally moved in, several months later, after their honeymoon. Yes, you heard me right. It was about 3 months of marriage before Ellen finally moved in with her husband. And I'm not sure that Barry wanted it any other way because he still loved his escapes to West LA as well. In 1999, Barry welcomed his fourth child, Brittany Page. She brought him such happiness. And through her and Ellen, he found or refound his relationship to Judaism when Brittany Page started preschool right here at Temple Bethel. And Barry started coming across the street where we had been the whole time. I mentioned earlier about Moses, and as you can see, Barry had his early life, his midlife, and then his life beginning again at 59 when he married Ellen. And you, Ellen, and Brittany Page brought him joys he either hadn't had or wasn't ready to have before in his life. You showed him that love and that partnership that he had been seeking. And you found the strength and the love and the kindness that came back from him. You experienced his positivity and his optimism and his nurturing. And you found that passionate, steadfast, committed partner who would be with you all the remaining days of his life. Zecher Tzadik Livracha, the memories of the righteous are a blessing. Baruch Ata Adonai Hamenachem Ha'avelim. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are here to celebrate the life that was Barry Tishler. And there are many, many, many of you who I know have memories that you want to share. But we do have many of you who will be coming up and sharing, and I invite the rest of you who are here who will not have the opportunity to share. We don't do an open mic. But I invite you to recall those memories, recount them, put them in an email, put them in a note, and send them to Ellen. For it is through those memories that we get to relive all of those happy, wonderful moments in life. So I hope that you will share those with her. At this time, I am going to invite up our first speakers. And first, I am going to invite Barry's beautiful wife, Ellen, to come forward along with his son, Brad, to share some memories.
Brad asked me.
And you may unmask when you're at the microphone.
Okay. Brad asked me how I had the strength to speak at my parents' funerals. I suddenly remembered I had the strength because Barry was next to me. The reality set in that he's not going to be next to me today or ever again. Life will never be the same without Barry. Barry fought for 4 months so that we would all not have to gather here today. He so wanted to live, and I know it was because he wanted to take care of me and Brittany Page. When it became apparent that Barry was no longer going to be with us, Brittany Page asked me, or actually she said to me driving home in the car, "Mom, what are you going to do? You're such a hypochondriac." I agreed with her. And then I remembered what all of his patients had told me. Most of them would come up to me, even years ago, and say, "What am I going to do if he retires? I dread the day he's going to retire." When he closed his practice in San Pedro, patient after patient got in contact with me and said, "What am I going to do? I just don't know what I'm going to do." I said, "Well, obviously, you're going to have to get another doctor." They told me that was impossible. Sadly, now I know how you all felt. I really don't have to tell all of you here what a positive, happy, strong, brilliant, and bigger-than-life person that Barry was. When I first met Barry, I think it was on the first date at the Chart House. He says, "Number one, I will never get married again. Number two, I will never have another child. And number three, and most of all, I'll never have another dog. I just can't go through it." All of what he never wanted in his life ever again is what gave him the most love, pleasure, and meaning in what were to be the last 26 years of his life. Our precious Cosmo, who he loved dearly, was a fixture in his office and often accompanied him on rounds at the hospital. You know, I was just thinking now, he always came to San Pedro Hospital and the nurses loved it, but a couple times he went to Torrance. And I remember one of the nurses reported him there. And after it happened, I think it was the chief of staff, Barry had to meet with him. "Why did you bring a dog to this hospital?" And I remember the chief of staff met him and he met Cosmo. He says, "You can bring him anytime." He was actually a service dog. As most of you know, Cosmo passed away just before Barry got sick. I can't even tell you how difficult it is for me and Brittany Page to navigate without our men, but somehow we'll have to. Barry was so blessed to have a little girl in his life. Although he was usually the oldest dad, you'd never know it. He had so much energy and absolutely enjoyed taking her to all the birthday parties, amusement parks, even climbing on jungle gyms. We had a wonderful life together, and Barry was so full of life that we just feel that he's still with us. Brittany Page and I think, well, he's just delivering a baby. He'll be home soon. Aside from being a devoted husband and father, he was also a wonderful son-in-law. During his time in the hospital, he made it really clear that he wanted to be buried next to my mother. He said he wanted to spend eternity with my family, now his family. The true love that he had for my family proved that our meeting was destiny, and it was the same destiny that brought them together when Barry was buried on July 19th, which would have been my mom's 100th birthday. I've read so many of the comments that his patients and friends have made on Facebook about how much he meant to you. I just want you all to know how very mutual his feelings were towards all of you. I think you all know that all of your patients and all the doctors and nurses were his family. Actually, when we got married, I decided I was going to buy Barry. This was in the 90s, like 96. I went out and bought Barry pink shirts with coordinating ties. He says to me, "No way, I am not going to wear this to work. I'm not going to wear a pink shirt." I told him, "You're an OB/GYN. You can get away with it." He'd come home and tell me how the patients loved his pink shirts and ties, which many of you probably remember. The nurses told me that was his signature outfit. Another doctor told me they'd always picture Dr. Tischler walking down the hallways of the hospital with a spring in his step and his coattails flying in the wind. During his last days in the ICU, I noticed that one of the nurses seemed very emotional. She finally told us, Dr. Tischler had delivered her. He brought her into the world, and now she's caring for him at the end. This is the kind of thing that movies are made of, and ironically, a lot like Barry's life in general. One of the most poignant remarks a patient wrote on Facebook said it simply: Dr. Tischler was a legend in his field and an incredible human. I know that he will be here in spirit and through all of our memories, but also a part of him will always be here because of the more than 2,000 babies that he brought into the world.
Passionate, committed, steadfast. Elon asked Ellen, Brittany, and me to give 3 words each to describe my dad. So passionate, committed, and steadfast quickly came to mind for me, but there are many, many more words that describe him. And I look forward to hearing those words from friends and family who will speak shortly. My dad, Barrett Herbert von Tischler, didn't take half steps, literally or figuratively, which anyone who walked anywhere with him can tell you. Wait, what, who? I'll get to that in a bit. But first, I'd like to thank you all for coming and showing your respect for Dr. Tischler, my dad, Brittany's dad, Ellen's husband. Many of you know my dad because of his job welcoming babies into this world, which he did for over half a century, and many of you helped him for many of those years. As a matter of fact, at least 15,000 people share something in common with you. They were impacted by the man whose life we honor today. Over 5,000, that was a number Dad told me, but 5,000 babies that he delivered. So 5,000 babies, 2 parents, 15,000 at a minimum impacted. Some of those babies maybe even heard their first joke from a man whose greatest passion in life was going to Dodger baseball games. Wait, no, that's not right. That wasn't his greatest passion. But oh, did he love going to a Dodgers game, or a Rams game, or a Raiders game, or Lakers, or watching another game while at the game on a little portable TV or listening to it on the radio. Yeah, I witnessed that a couple of times, and some of you may have as well. So while he did love going to sporting events, his greatest passion in life was being a doctor, or more specifically an OBGYN. I'm not saying he didn't have a great love for family, friends, or religion. He did. He cherished time spent with his family and every one of you. But I want you to think back to that first love in your life. Think about the beginning of that relationship and try to remember the butterflies in your stomach when you first met or saw that someone special, and how you couldn't wait to see them again or talk to them. That's how my dad felt about being a doctor. His passion for doing what he loved never faded like those butterflies we may or may not remember. 5,000 babies, that's a lot of babies, and their first sight was of the man we are here to remember today, more commonly known as Dr. Barry H. Tischler, or Dr. T, or Barry, or Dad to a select group. And I'd be remiss if I didn't throw in Tish and T, as those were nicknames I shared too, and probably Brittany. I won't ask you to raise your hand when I ask this question. Just kidding, I will. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hand to this question. Who knows Dr. Tischler? Raise your hand. That was a mulligan. And for anyone here uninitiated in golf, a mulligan is a freebie. And did I mention my dad also loved golf? So the first question was an icebreaker, and it also helps security identify those of you that don't know my dad and are just here for the food. Next question. How many of you were delivered by my dad or have children who were delivered by my dad? Raise your hand. And look around. Look around. Don't be shy. As it turns out, my dad even delivered his current neighbor some 30 some odd years ago. So I think it's safe to assume everybody here knows my dad was a doctor. But not everyone may have known, before Elon mentioned it earlier, that my grandfather, Joseph Arthur von Tischler, was a doctor, a general practitioner from the Bronx in New York, and he actually made house calls. And that was back in the day when being a milkman was a job. And for those of you here under 50, yes, a man did deliver milk in a truck to your house and butter. And doctors did actually make house calls on a regular basis. When my dad was in high school, my grandfather would occasionally take him on house calls, which was the start of my dad's passion and love for medicine. And after my dad finished medical school and was in his residency, my grandfather would let him take some of his house calls. Nothing crazy, soft lobs. To paint a picture of my dad's life, I'm going to give you a little background. So, the Great Depression started in 1929 and ended in 1939 when my dad was 3 years old. World War II started that same year in 1939 and ended when my dad was 9. So you guys probably didn't think you're going to get a history lesson today, but that's okay, because there'll be a test at the end. So the COVID-19 recession is a little more recent and a lot more familiar to everyone here and can provide a rubric of sorts. We've all felt the effects of the COVID-19 recession, and technically it only lasted 2 months. I'm not sure who did that math, but the Great Recession of 2007, 2009, that was 19 months. And if anyone bought a house around that time, I did in 2006. It took me about 15 years to be able to refinance because I was so upside down. And I say all of that to say that the economy was really bad when my dad was a child, teenager, and a young adult. That said, my grandfather was doing fine as a doctor. As mentioned earlier, my grandmother was a teacher with a steady income, but that was definitely not the situation for a lot of my grandfather's patients. Many couldn't afford to pay my grandfather because they just didn't have money for a luxury like health care. So my grandfather knew they couldn't afford to pay him, and he knew that they would go without care before taking a handout. So some of them would make him some handmade gifts, and my grandfather humbly accepted those. So one particular item is a hand-crocheted tapestry that's in a picture frame, and it's got Joseph von Tischler, MD, and the medical symbol, and I try to pronounce it, but I'll mess it up, hanging on the wall in my office. I know that's a lot, but I'm trying to cover 85 years in just 3 hours. So we only have about 2 hours and 50 minutes to go. Did I mention my dad liked jokes and had a really great sense of humor? I'm joking. I only have 2 more hours to go. I had written and rewritten most of this story, and as I read the sense of humor part for about the 100th time, I remember being in my dad's office talking to a pharmaceutical rep, and I was probably 13 or 14. And this was way before computers. And the rep had a stack of jokes in a binder, written and in cartoon format. And he shared those with my dad because he knew he had a great sense of humor too. And that was a random memory back to my dad's earlier years. So my dad grew up in an economy that was on a scale of 10 to 15 times worse than the economic downturns we've had since the Great Depression. Imagine, if you can, a gloomy economy much worse than what we have at this moment, brightly contrasted by my grandfather's compassionate and personal brand of medicine. And then you can truly begin to understand how my dad was shaped into the passionate and committed doctor that we all knew and miss. I believe that being included in his father's profession at a young age and during his residency shaped him early on to see patients as more than patients, to see them as friends and extended family, to see them as all of you gathered here today. He had a great passion for sports his entire life and actually wanted to be a high school coach, and probably would have been if my grandfather hadn't advised him in a very practical manner that he would have a very different life than the one he was accustomed to if he became a high school coach. So for those of you that have worked with my dad, you can imagine what Coach Tischler would have expected from his athletes. Of course, his expectations wouldn't have been any more or less than he would have expected of himself. For example, my dad graduated from high school and enrolled at Dartmouth College at the age of 16. A bit of trivia about Dartmouth. The movie Animal House, that was based on a Dartmouth fraternity house, Alpha Delta fraternity, which my dad was not in that one. He graduated from Dartmouth when he was 20, and then from medical school at 24. And let me back up a little bit before those graduations. So 16-year-old Barrett met a girl at camp, And when he was 20, he wanted to marry her. I'm not sure how close she was to Karen's space at camp. That's my aunt. In the mid-1900s and up to 1970, as a matter of fact, males under the age of 21 were required to get parental approval to get married and provide a birth certificate. Still 21 in Mississippi. So can you imagine my dad's surprise when he looked at his birth certificate and saw Barrett Herbert von Tischler? He may have even said, "Wait, what, who?" He had never actually seen his birth certificate before, and he had been addressed as Barry Tishler his entire life. So earlier I mentioned my dad didn't take half steps. This is another example. He didn't like the name Barrett, so he immediately decided to legally change it from Barrett to Barry, and he dropped the Von. His 13-year-old twin granddaughters think that Von Tischler is cool and wished we had Von Tischler as part of our last name. Ellen and Brittany like it too, but I guess we all don't like it enough to change it back. So my dad served as an OBGYN in the Army during the Vietnam era. It was a time of the draft, but my dad didn't wait to be drafted. He stepped up, he volunteered, and he served from 1966 to 1968. Within that same month of his honorable discharge in 68, he headed west to California, where he practiced here for over 50 years. I took a different journey than my dad, but I'd like to share a couple of noteworthy convergence points. I joined the Army and left the service after my initial 4-year enlistment. And then 3 years later, during Desert Storm, I wanted to re-enlist. But as a prior service person, I could not go back into the job I had before. The only way you could go back on active was to join Special Forces, so I signed up. The attrition rate can be as high as 75%. If I failed at any point during any of that training over the year, I would have immediately been discharged. I add that to say that my dad was very proud I was selected as a Special Forces weapons specialist, and I was equally proud to have my father attend my graduation ceremony at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and see me awarded my Green Beret. My dad served as an LA Reserve police officer, so we shared a special bond talking about weapons and shooting. It's probably a different Dr. Tischler picture for some of you. During my time in 1st Special Forces Group at Fort Lewis, Washington, I put in a package to go to Officer Candidate School, or OCS. Part of the package was a letter to the board from me stating why I wanted to be an officer. I can't remember everything I wrote back in 1993, but most important was that I wanted to be an officer like the man I admired, respected, and loved, my father, Captain Tischler, Barry, U.S. Army Medical Corps. He also wrote a letter of recommendation for my package. It must have worked as I retired as a major. He attended my officer commissioning at Fort Benning, Georgia in 1994. And I was honored to give my dad the Silver Dollar salute. The first salute is an old tradition for all service branches in which a newly commissioned officer gives a silver dollar to the first person whom they receive their very first salute of their career. Thank you, Dad, for your love and counsel over the years. I love you. I salute you, and I will miss our little talks. Do you know how hard it is to find a silver dollar? You know, the big one, not those new ones. It's hard. As I close sharing a few of 57 years of memories with you, I want to thank all of the ladies whose appointments were extended over the years by some of my conversations with my dad. He always took my calls, so some of you might have even been in there. Thank you for sharing some of his time with me. Thank you all so much for coming and being a part of my dad's life. I appreciate it, and I know Ellen and Brittany Page do as well. I want to thank all of you who were involved with caring for my dad at the end of his amazing journey. Please please stop by and say hi before you leave so I can personally thank you. And thank you all so much for coming today and for being part of my dad's life. And I had to throw Erica and Gary in too, because the pizza and the spaghetti from Lamppost, my dad, he really wasn't eating anything at the end, but he was eating that, so that was awesome. I appreciate it, and I know Ellen and Brittany do as well. And speaking of Ellen and Brittany, I want to thank them for providing love and companionship to my dad over the years and setting up this beautiful memorial. Elon too, thank you. Brittany took the pictures and they look great, or set it up. And lastly, I want to give a special thanks to the friends who will be sharing some of their special memories of my father with us. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen and Brad. As Brad mentioned, those who worked with Barry and his patients quickly felt like his family. So please lend your ear briefly now to Barry's partner, Mehdi Hemmat, followed by one of Barry's patients, Pat Peterson.
Thank you. I made some notes to read over to make it quick. Half a century in 5 minutes. But then, since you took about 3 hours, I think I can get my share. All right. You know, I'm here to talk about my good friend and long-time associate, and it's an honor to speak about Dr. Barry Tishler. Now, I came to this community, to San Pedro, about 43 years ago, 1979, and Barry was here 7 years before me. And of course, I met him through work, and I want to talk about him, but not so much about his professional achievements. You all know, Brad talked to him. You know, what a great school he went to, his military service, you know, community service, hospital, chief of staff, chairman of departments. But I want to talk about his personality. That's what I want to focus on. You know, I met Barry through work, but soon after, we socialized, we worked with each other, we helped each other in cases, and our friendship became stronger. And it really blossomed when he decided to build a building across from the hospital, 1294. And he and I and 3 other physicians became partners. And at that moment, I realized that what a gentleman he was. You know, in any kind of partnership, you can tell. And this man was a real gentleman. And of course, he was classy and he had a great taste. He built the nicest office suite for himself, you know, the best quality. The furnitures, equipments, best view, you know. He was on top floor and had the view of the harbor. We were on the bottom floor. And you who work with him, and those of you who visited that office, you can attest to that. He enjoyed that office. He really loved it. At the same time, with a great taste, Barry collected the best toys any man ever wanted in his life, and he enjoyed them. Giving an example, you know, we went to a lot of meetings together, out of town, in town, and one day in Beverly Hills, we were in a meeting and we decided to take a little break. We walked out, and here we're going across the street and I see, okay, Rolls-Royce dealership. Barry walks in, he buys a Rolls-Royce. That's the kind of guy he was. He really enjoyed practicing for about 10 years or more in that office, but we hit a bad economy. And, you know, as bad as business people, doctors are, we couldn't hold on to that building, and we lost it. It was a sad moment for us, but not for Barry. Barry always was positive. He always saw the glass half full. He and me, we went in a different office, and we started the best practice those days in San Pedro. And the good part of it was because of his personality, because of his positive attitude, he was fearless. He was always curious. He was hardworking. And because of his curiosity, we learned the best techniques, we bought the best equipments, no matter how much it costed. And our practice did well. You know, we hardly argued over anything. He always went along with, you know, whatever we planned, whatever I like to do. Well, unless he really, really didn't like something. And you know what he did? He came to me and said, Ellen said no. Ellen said no was the end of discussion. That's it. And we hardly fought over anything. Well, other than when we were at lunch. You know, as soon as the basket of bread hit the table, he would have jumped at it, eat the first one, ask for the second one, and sometimes third one. Barry liked bread. And I never seen anybody who could eat so much bread and didn't gain anything, you know. Food was not that important, but the bread was. What I should say, he loved steak on bone. That was important. You know, we went to a lot of dinner meetings, and you know, if they didn't offer steak on bone, we walked out. That happened a lot. But if they did offer, a good part of it would go home. Not for anybody, for Cosmo. He loved that dog. He loved Cosmo. You know, I haven't seen anybody that has so much strength mentally and physically. He always supported me. If in a hard time, if I was sad, he would come and say, Mehdi, it's not cancer. He always said that, it's not cancer. And as strong as he was, it wasn't cancer. But in the last few months of his life, although, you know, I knew that this could come to the end, still was hard. I forgot to say one story, and that's how a great surgeon he was. And it's not just my observation. You know, I've talked to some of our colleagues that used to be his residents at Harvard General, UCLA. And they tell me that he always took the hardest, the most difficult cases, and it didn't matter. He examined them and would say, this is a chip shot. You know, he was a golfer. And he would do it and finished it quickly, the best way. So Barry was special. And, you know, when he passed, really it still came on as a shock for me. But thank you for allowing me to share these things with you. And that's it.
Hello, my name is Pat Peterson, and I have been a patient of Dr. Tischler's for over 47 years. When Ellen called and asked me to speak, I was surprised and thankful to be able to honor this great doctor and, more importantly, this great friend. He was not just a doctor to me and my family, he was a close and caring friend. Our first encounter was in 1975. You look so much like him. Oh my God. Oh my God. So freaky when I walked in here. Oh my God.
Where does it hurt?
Our first encounter was in 1975, and it was not a pleasant one. Dr. Bergman was my doctor, and he had this new physician in his office named Dr. Barry Tishler. To me, he was some dark-haired know-it-all running around the office. I personally did not like him. Dr. Bergman said to give him a chance, but I just couldn't. I was pregnant, and I wanted to be coddled. Well, that was not Dr. Tischler's style. I thought he was so rude, no bedside manner at all. As I got closer to delivery, Dr. Bergman was going on vacation for a few days. I was not happy that I might end up with Tischler. Bergman said to cross your legs until he got back. Well, of course, my daughter couldn't wait. It was in the hospital during this time that I fell in love with this man. He took charge, ordered my C-section after 12 hours of labor, and wouldn't leave my side. During this hospital stay, I developed pneumonia. I could still hear him yelling at the nurses as to why they didn't catch it and why they weren't watching me, and he was furious. It scared the hell out of me. I developed such respect for him at that time, and that respect has lasted these 47 years. This is when I started to believe that no matter what medical problems I had, that he would never let me die. I believed it and told him many times how I felt that, and he said that was true. During those years, he would discuss how proud he was of his children living in New York. I actually met a couple of them through the years. He was so proud of them and their accomplishments. When I was in Torrance Memorial Hospital for my heart surgery, Dr. Tischler was there to see me daily, more than my cardiologist. In my 5-day stay, he visited once or twice a day. I wasn't even his patient, but like I said, I knew he would make sure I did not die. That meant a lot to me, and he knew it. Dr. T delivered both of my daughters. When I had my first daughter, he claimed that she was the prettiest baby he had ever delivered. This is likely something he told every single patient. Okay, but I didn't care, I believed him. Over the years, Dr. T and my daughter Jennifer became good friends. He was so much more than just her doctor. He was always there for her. Plus, he would actually tell her to tell me that he thinks she's prettier than me, just to piss me off. And then he said that she had actually taken my place in his heart, but I knew she could never. When I questioned him about it, he laughed, saying he knew that that comment would get me to make an appointment. We had too many years and too many secrets and too many laughs for me not to have a place in his heart. He also delivered both of Jennifer's sons, and when she had medical and personal issues, he was right by her side, almost defensive in a sense. Still, she also deeply respected and cared for him. I believe there are a lot of patients here today that have similar stories. We know that he went beyond just being our doctor. He was so much more. During the years and with the birth of my second daughter, he became a better friend and confidant to me. We would talk about everything. His staff would hate it when I came in because it would back up all the appointments. He would be so behind on his scheduled appointments after me because he spent too much time with me. He loved to talk. We happened to end up both single at the same time. We had so many talks about whom we were dating, where we had been in our love quest. And then he said he had met this woman named Ellen, that he was quite smitten with her, and he said he was going to go for it. Well, you know how that all turned out. Hence, the story begins about Brittany Page. He adored her. He could not talk enough about her. In fact, it was getting awfully bad. He was talking about nothing but her. Talk about her, her schools, her accomplishment, her dreams that he wanted and tried to make true for her. She was the biggest part of his heart. I knew the location of the last 3 homes he had lived in. How many patients are given that information? He knew that I would not just pop in, but I think he was afraid Jennifer would. When he went to Palm Springs, he called me to give me the lowdown. What would you think if you saw a call coming in from Dr. Tischler on your phone? Who died? You know, what's wrong? What did you find out about me? What do you need? He told me about his plans, and he was actually getting ready to make an appointment to go. I was actually getting ready to make an appointment to go to Palm Springs, and he called and said, screw that place. He was coming home. Last time I saw and spoke to him, this is going to be a hard one. Last time I saw and spoke to him was about 6 months ago. I was driving by his house on my way home, and he was standing out front. I stopped. He was so happy to see me as I was to see him. He spoke about being depressed, that he wasn't practicing anymore, and how much he missed his patients. I said, what, you think we don't miss you too? He talked about everything in that hour. I'm so thankful that I got out of the car to speak and hug him that day. If I had known it would be the last time I would have spoken to him or hugged him, I would have hugged him a little tighter, a little longer. We will miss you terribly, Dr. T. We'll admire and love you always. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Pat and Mehdi. Ecclesiastes wrote, "For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak." I invite you now to listen to the memories of a cousin of Barry's, Scott Mendelson, followed by the medical staff director, Denise Eastburn, and then another patient, a dear friend of mine, Annie Hill.
My name is Scott. I'm Barry's cousin. Actually, I'm Ellen's cousin, but when you marry one of my cousins, you become my cousin, whether you want to be or not. I am so fortunate that you married somebody that was very generous and very caring. When you are a relative of Barry's, it comes with perks. One of the perks is you get to go to a lot of sporting events. And we've heard from Brad and from the cantor, Barry was a big sports fan. An understatement. Barry lived and died sports. Very fortunate for the rest of us. When Barry and Ellen lived in Manhattan Beach, those of us that would go to the Dodger games with him would meet at the house. We'd all get into Barry's car, because Barry was very generous about driving, always. And we'd get on the freeways during rush hour, which meant we had a long ride. But at the same time, it was a good opportunity to converse with Barry and his friends when there were others. The journey basically was the destination, especially when the Dodgers didn't play well. That was the best part of the evening. Barry was a sports trivia nut. There's nothing about baseball during the 20th century that Barry didn't know. And we would test each other. And then after the game was over, during the drive home, there would be a big test. And it was just fun. it was a lot of fun going to the ball game, especially the Dodger games. Barry was also a UCLA basketball fan, UCLA football fan, and Brad mentioned a number of other teams that Barry loved. But I remember mostly the Dodger games. Barry had an affinity for bobbleheads, and he always managed to get tickets for the bobblehead nights because he always wanted to bring a bobblehead home to you, Brittany Page, as you know. And you must have about 5,000 of them by now, a whole house full. Oh my God. I got a bunch of bobbleheads, and I only went to a small fraction of the games compared to Barry. Any rate, there was one night, I remember, Barry must have worked late that day, and so he got home late. And so we got a late start going to the stadium, but we got to the game just before it started. And you know, you go up to the gate, you go through the turnstile, and right there would be a large table with a lot of bobbleheads on them that they were handing out, and a couple people would give you a bobblehead as you went into the stadium. Well, one night, that night that we got a late start, the table was gone, the bobbleheads were gone, and nobody was handing out bobbleheads. Barry wasn't happy because he really rushed. To say his external New Yorker came out would be an understatement. If any of you have heard when Barry gets upset, it can be loud. He was expressive. So he goes up to the customer service table, where the ladies that worked the customer service desk knew him well, and he says, "Where's the bobbleheads? I want a bobblehead. I came here for the bobblehead. That's why I'm here tonight." And went on and on and on. And I said, "Dr. Tischler, they're gone. There are only 40,000 bobbleheads given out, and we've given them all out. We're sold out tonight." Barry wasn't happy at all. You could hear him all the way down the hallway, but eventually he calmed down as he sulked to the seats. So we get to the seats, and Barry said, "Excuse me for a little while, I'll be back." I thought maybe he went to the restroom, bought a hot dog, whatever. Comes back several minutes later with a smile on his face and the bobblehead. Where there's a will, there's a way for Barry. "Barry, where'd you get the bobblehead?" "Fernando." He went to the press box to bum a bobblehead from Fernando Valenzuela, who, if some of you don't know Fernando Mania, 1980, I think Barry delivered one or two of his kids, as a matter of fact. So he was very close to, so I guess Fernando owed him a couple bobbleheads or something like that. So at any rate, it was a happy evening after all, thanks to Fernando. Barry had a propensity for eating hot dogs. I think there was a reference about where does Barry put all of this? We thought Barry had a hollow leg, which is where all the hot dogs went. Hot dogs, by the way, do have bread. Somebody talked about bread. He would eat a hot dog after hot dog after hot dog. I imagine he didn't eat all day, or he had an incredibly fast metabolic rate. Any rate, he would always try to get me to keep up with him, and there's no way I could keep up with him when it came to a hot dog eating contest. But on a couple of occasions, he would basically get me to split a hot dog with him at the very end. So I'd go and I'd get a hot dog, put the mustard on it, the relish, bring it back. "Where's the knife?" "Barry, they don't trust me with knives here. You have to break it yourself." So Barry, the surgeon, surgically dissected a hot dog, perfect halves, without spilling any relish or mustard. And we enjoyed the last half hot dog of the evening. Which takes me to one evening when we went to a UCLA basketball game at Pauley Pavilion, which we did often. And usually what would happen, we'd drive separately and we'd meet there in front of Pauley Pavilion. Well, one evening I get a call from Barry. "I'm going to be really late, the 405 freeway," and if any of you have been on the 405 freeway, especially through West LA, it's horrendous at rush hour. But he said there must have been an accident or something because it's just not moving. So I waited and waited, no big deal, you know, we'll get in eventually. And Barry drives up to Pauley Pavilion. Now normally he would park in the parking lot and walk up and we'd go in. But this time he drove up. I thought, well, something wrong? So I go up to the car and I said, "Barry, what's wrong? You don't want to go to the game?" He says, "I'm exhausted. I had a late night last night. I'm working all day long. The freeway was horrendous. I'm just spent." So he gave me 2 tickets to get into the arena. One was to go in, buy him a hot dog, bring it back with a soda to the car, because he didn't want to miss out on his hot dog. The drive shouldn't be for nothing, at least a hot dog. That was more important than the game. So what I did was I went inside, bought a couple hot dogs. Actually, I bought 3 hot dogs, because I knew Barry could break one in half, and we each ate a hot dog and a half and a soda. I didn't go into the game with that second ticket. The evening, what was most important to me was spending time with Barry always. Whether it's a Dodger game, UCLA football game, or UCLA basketball game, Barry's company was what was most important. Oh, there'd be a baseball or basketball or football game going on, and thank God baseball is a slow game because you can still converse all night long and not miss a pitch. But Barry loved his bobbleheads, Barry loved his hot dogs, and just the whole experience. And Barry was such a trivia nut. I mean, he really enjoyed all aspects of sports. And if I asked him a question and he didn't know the answer, he would give me a homework assignment. Would you Google it and email me tomorrow with the answer? Because he didn't want to have a question that he couldn't answer. I have to say also, Barry's passion was coaching, because when we would go to the basketball games in particular, Barry could outcoach any coach that was there. He knew the game, the intricacies, and all the technical aspects. But it was a pleasure, a joy, to go to games and to spend time with Barry, whatever it was, either at the house for Passover Seder, which he led, by the way, as well as going to the games. Barry, I miss you. Thank you very, very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Denise Eastburn. I'm the Director of Medical Staff Services at San Pedro Hospital, and I'm honored and humbled to have this opportunity to share a little bit about my friend Barry Tishler. Today we're here to honor and remember him, as death has taken away a genuinely warm individual, a loving husband and father, a compassionate friend, a compassionate physician, and a good friend. We are here to pay tribute and celebrate a life well lived. A life where colleagues describe him as affable, cooperative, helpful, and dedicated. A life where patients describe him as caring, empathetic, and responsive. A life where our employees describe him as joyful, friendly, and authentic. A life committed to the health and wellness of women in the San Pedro and Harbor communities. A life that leaves behind a legacy so rich and so full. As you've already heard, Dr. Tischler arrived to San Pedro in 1968. And throughout his 50-plus year career, he has brought joy and happiness to many families in our community as he's delivered thousands of babies. He became involved in medical staff leadership, where he held the position of department chair on a number of occasions. He was elected Vice Chief of Staff and then became Chief of Staff in 2003. Now, I first met Dr. Tischler in 1986 as I embarked on my career in the medical staff office at Torrance Memorial. We then became reacquainted in the late 1990s when our paths crossed again and I joined the team at San Pedro Hospital. We had a lot of fun as we worked through medical staff business at the medical center. We've had some challenging times too. And no matter the situation, he always seemed to have a saying. My personal favorite is, "You catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar." As you also heard on multiple occasions already today, when he had a rare moment to relax, you could find him in the doctor's lounge discussing sports, particularly UCLA football and Dodgers baseball. He and I spent countless hours discussing Dodger baseball. He would say, "Well, Denise, what does your husband think about that?" And I would respond, "It doesn't matter what he thinks. Even though I'm a girl, I can still talk about Dodger baseball with you." As Cousin mentioned, he had amazing seats at Dodger Stadium. And again, if you were the lucky recipient of one of the nights where bobbleheads were being given, you better make sure you brought one back to him, because that was for Brittany Page. He faced his recent illness with great courage. Many others in his circumstance would have given up. He fought until the end, and in his own quiet and calm manner, he showed us how to work through challenging times. I had the chance to talk with him on many occasions when he was in the hospital. His main complaint was the fact that he couldn't get Dodger baseball through our cable channel. But on the Thursday before he passed, we had made arrangements to take him up to the 5th floor to labor and delivery for one last visit. When I walked into his room to tell him of the plan, he shook his head and he whispered, "No." But in my persistent but cheerful way, I said, "Are you sure? We're ready to take you up. Everything is ready." He replied, "No, thank you." He continued to say thank you a few more times. Those were the final words he whispered to me on Thursday. To Ellen and Brad and Brittany Page, I know this is particularly a difficult time for you. Please accept my heartfelt condolences on behalf of the entire administrative team at the hospital. Life can be fleeting, but a life lived to the fullest stays in fond memories. Thank you. Sorry, that's okay.
Good afternoon. I am Anna Hill, and Dr. Tischler had been my doctor since I was 19 years old, so over 40 years. Going to an appointment was like going to see family. He always had a smile and a sense of humor, but he was serious too. Appointments included a discussion of whatever I was seeing him for, and then we would talk politics, the Dodgers. He would talk about Cosmo, who was there a lot of the time, and we would talk about how long the home remodeling was taking. And Dr. Tischler always spoke about Brittany Page, how proud he was of you. I always liked taking the last appointment of the day so the appointment wouldn't impact any of the other patients' wait time. He delivered all 3 of my children, and each has a Dr. Tischler memory. Thank you for that. For my first child, he was called away from a Halloween party to come and handle the delivery. She was his 5th delivery of the day, and he saw patients in his office that day as well, because I was one of his patients, so I know he was there. I was a few days past my due date with my second child, and at my visit, Dr. Tischler told me he was leaving on Friday to visit his mother in New York. If I didn't have the baby before that, another doctor would have to handle the delivery. I said, nope. I told him I didn't want anyone else. He was going to have to make it happen before he left. So on Wednesday, he induced and delivered my first baby boy. With my third child, we called Dr. Tischler when contractions were pretty steady, and we headed for the hospital. When we got there, nurses got me into a gown, got all the monitors in place before Dr. T got there. But he arrived soon after. I was still on a gurney in the hallway. He stopped for a moment and said he was going to go change his clothes. Then they rolled me into the room, and as soon as they did, I told my husband, "This baby's on his way out. Head's coming out." My husband took a quick peek and went yelling down the hallway, "Dr. Tischler, the baby's coming." So Dr. Tischler came running back and arrived in my room with no shirt to make the delivery. And he says, "Okay, we're going to call this one shirtless." He delivered my family, and over the years, he sat in the chair next to me to talk with me about medical concerns and how we'd handle them. And he also sat in the chair next to me to talk about concerns that someone else was going to have to handle. He referred me out to the best oncology surgeon, who is still one of my doctors. I'm very thankful to Dr. Tischler for that. There are some people that are so energetic and charismatic that it seems they will live forever. Dr. Tischler was one of those people. He was a part of my family's story, and for that he will always have a place in my heart. May he rest in peace. His memory is a blessing.
In Judaism, we have a blessing for healing. And over the years, I have had the honor of singing this blessing for many a mother who had just given birth to her child. Today, we offer this blessing in a different way. We offer it for our healing, for the healing of Ellen and Brittany Page and Brad, for the healing of everyone who was family to Barry Tishler. For while we say this blessing for healing of body, we also say it for refuat hanefesh, healing of the soul. This mishaberach, this blessing, speaks about how we are not alone, how God's presence is there with us whenever we are in need of healing. Avotenu mekor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misheberach imotenu mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, each and every time that I visited Barry in the hospital over the past 4 months, I would sing that before I left. And while he might have been alert and joking with me and being typical Barry, whenever I would sing that, he would just close his eyes and listen and be blessed. He was certainly a blessing to so many of us, as we have been hearing today. So I ask you now to lend your ear to just a few more stories. First, from 2 nurses who loved him very much, Joanne and Janice, and then from another patient, Venus Paez, and finally, well, not finally, and then another physician, Miles Shaw, and then finally, in Hebrew we say acharon acharon chaviv, which means the last is the most cherished. And so at the end of hearing all of these stories, we will hear from Brittany Page.
Good afternoon. My name's Joanne, and I'm a nurse. I've worked with Dr. Tischler for over 23 years. In addition to that, my mom worked with Dr. Tischler,
at the hospital for over 33 years. He's not only a doctor, he's also a friend. After my own father passed away, he sat with me on my very first day back when I was just kind of wanted to be alone, working on the computer. He came over and he sat with me. He had words of support and understanding that I knew came truly from his heart. He's always had a very calm nature, a true flair for style. Now I know.
Now we know where the pink shirts came from. We didn't know. All these years, we wondered. Sorry.
The best ties ever. He had the coolest sunglasses and would run into the department with those sunglasses on. And a smile that never ends. Dr. Tischler practiced his craft with an intrinsic set of core values. He was wildly devoted to his patients. He's wildly devoted to our hospital, staff, and this community. This showed over and over again through the multiple generations of San Pedrians that chose him for their health care. Abraham Lincoln once said, "In the end, it's not the years in your life that counts. It's the life in your years." Barry Tishler contributed so much to this life. He gave so much to his work. Here was a life that demands notice, a life that exemplified brilliance, a life that inspired. Our sorrow is lessened only slightly with the comforting thought that we had the privilege to know him.
Hi, I'm Janice. I actually joined the family at San Pedro in 1992. I did not join a unit, I joined a family. We were a family and a team. Patient care was a team effort with Dr. Hemmett and Dr. Tischler at the lead. As with any family, you might have a squabble. That was normal occasionally, like the time he wanted to fire me. He forgot about it. Years later, I brought it up several times, just when I needed a little leverage. When you became a patient of Dr. Tischler, it wasn't just you, it was your family that became the patients. Many of our girls, he delivered their babies. He took care of us for GYN needs. On a personal note, my husband used to love to go to visits with me to go get my exam that we women have to do. I never knew why until I got there, and they would start talking baseball and football while I waited and waited and waited. And I had to kind of say, can you get back to what we're doing here, because this is getting uncomfortable. When anybody in our unit went through a bad time, as we all have gone through, and I can tell you I've been through several, losses, illnesses, whatever it was, he was there. 2 days after I lost my husband, he called and said, "I need you in my office on Monday morning." When I was having issues that I was not dealing as well, he saw it before I did. My sister was his patient. She wasn't a patient, she was a member of the family. When she decided to adopt rather than try and have a baby naturally, it was difficult. My brother-in-law had issues. He was not sure about that. Dr. Tischler said, "Bring him on in, I want to talk to him." Because of Dr. Tischler, we have 2 beautiful nephews. I didn't always thank him because they're teenagers now. It's very crazy in our lives. And the most important addition to our family because of Dr. Tischler, we have a sheepadoodle named Molly. And we thank him every day for that. He was a sounding block for us, as Joanne has said. He was there when you needed him. I had to go over some issues the last couple of months for my own change of my career and so forth since the unit has closed. And where did I go? I went to room 350 because that's where he was, and we sat and we talked for a while. If he didn't hear from me, he would call me every so often just to make sure I was okay. And he did that with just not me, but with everybody and with the patients that you've heard about before, from now today. I mean, he was just a light. And I cherish every moment that we had together, and I will continue to cherish all those talks that we had. And it was an honor to be able to share that with you today. Thank you.
I'm going to take the moment right now to say it was a blessing to know Dr. Tischler. When I met Dr. Tischler, I was fighting for my life. I didn't have no babies, he didn't deliver, but he saved me from a few of my surgeries. And one year I had 5 different surgeries, and he saved my life. But Dr. Tischler wasn't just a doctor. He was like a father I never had. He helped me, he guided me. He helped me be strong for my family. I was on my deathbed. Dr. Tischler was like, I'm not letting you give up. I'm here for you. There's certain conversations that we had, and I never knew what it was to have a father because I was a foster kid for 18 years. And I thanked him. He had that patient, that kind heart, that love. Even though there was some surgeries that he wasn't able to attend, he attended to be there with me by my bedside. He guided me to the best doctors. I met him in San Pedro. And today I could say, because of Dr. Tischler, it was 10 years that I didn't get to work. Now I'm security in San Pedro, just across the street. I don't have no more cancer. I'm free. My health, I'm able to walk. I'm able to live my life because of Dr. Tischler. He has a loving wife, his daughter that I got to meet. And they were there by my side too. And I thank you guys very much. I remember he was mad because my daughter went into labor and he wasn't able to deliver. You should have told them to call me. And I was like, doctor, she landed up having 9 centimeters in bed. By the time he would have got here, it was too late. But he was still checked on my daughter. As Dr. Tischler was sick, I used to go visit him, take my lunch, and I would go visit him, try to motivate him. Come on, Dr. Tischler, remember you used to tell me to get up, to walk. When I didn't want to walk from my surgeries, and me being sick in the hospital. And the last time I seen Dr. Tischler, he was very happy, and he said, you know, I appreciate you trying to come. You keep up the good work. I'm very proud of you. And I thank him because I was able to go. His wife was able to let me know every time, and I would visit him as much as I can. I love you, Dr. Tischler, and I'm gonna miss you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Miles Shaw from the emergency department. I'm the one that used to call Dr. Tischler at 2 in the morning to have him rush in for an ectopic pregnancy, so sorry, Ellen, but forgive my attire. I'm actually in the middle of a shift now, and but came over. Rabbi, does the hospital thing work as a yarmulke? Or?
Works perfect.
Anyway, this was an unbelievable man, 50 plus years. Mehdi, I thought you and I were old, but we're youngsters compared to him, 50-something years. It's amazing. And you know, I've been at the hospital 27 years, and I remember him when I first came, but he has touched the lives of so many people at that hospital. Today, you know, the nurses there saw that I was coming over, and the stories that they were talking about. Ashley, our unit secretary, she gave me permission to tell everyone this. She, like Venus, was tearful that he saved her life. It was like 2 in the morning, and she came in with, she had a ruptured uterus. She had prior C-sections and was hypotensive, in shock, required 5 units of blood. And Barry came right in, 2, 3 in the morning, and saved her, took her to C-section, and she's so grateful to him. There's Clarissa, our admitting clerk, was talking about, she delivered her 3 children, and talked about that she had a conversation with him about how much she liked the cutie oranges, those little oranges that are hard to find. For the next few months, every week he would bring in some cutie oranges and leave them for her. You know, that's like, I was hearing how he's, you know, takes his patients in like family, and that's really, really what he does. Gabe, a nurse that's been there for 30 plus years, talked about him, remembered that he was actually a reserve police officer in Long Beach. I don't know, remember that, Chris? But he was a police officer like 25, 30 years ago. I might add that there weren't so many shootings back then when he was on duty. But, I mean, he delivered so many people. I mean, half our nursing staff in the ER, he's either delivered them or their babies. I think probably half of San Pedro. I mean, only Amazon has delivered more than Barry. But no, he was just an amazing guy that touched the lives of so many, and his legacy will go on in the memories of the families and people he's touched, Pedro. So we'll miss him.
You all got to hear what a great doctor, leader, friend, husband, and person that my dad was. But that's not what I want to talk to you about. I want to talk about our relationship. Sorry. I want to talk about what kind of father he was and what it felt like to have him as a dad. You know, I used to joke around a lot and say that I didn't know what my parents would do without me. I say this because this is the man who would call me up and ask me how long he needs to microwave his tacos for. Or he needed help with scanning or emailing something, or my favorite phone calls were the ones where I was in trouble. And he was like, "Where are you? You should have been home already." But now I'm not quite sure what to do. I don't know how I'm going to keep going without him, because he was more than just my dad. He was my best friend, my supporter, my protector, my hero, and the person that I aspire to be. He was also the only person in the whole world that I could tell all my secrets to, and never had to worry about him breaking my trust. Even after a long day of working, my dad always made time to listen to me and talk with me. He was strong and honest, but he also had a huge heart. I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I'm pretty sure I took up most of the room in there. We got to spend a lot of time together, swimming, watching old movies, dancing, going to Dodger games, UCLA basketball and football games, taking family vacations, and he would even take me on his rounds with him and show me off on the 5th floor. I know that no one's relationship is perfect, especially with a parent, but ours was pretty, bad word, damn close. In my entire life, I'm pretty sure that Dad and I really only had 2 major fights. One was because of something stupid I did, and the other was also because of something stupid I did. Now, there were definitely times when Dad and I wouldn't always get along, and those consisted of the times that he would embarrass me. One of which is when we would go to the Dodger games, and he would do his famous maneuver, which was just a fancy way of saying that he would drive up in the left-hand lane and then proceed to cut across all the other lanes to the right in order to enter the stadium. Since I always sat in the back, it would be my job to see if the other cars would let us in. I used to get so scared to ask because I thought they were all pissed at us. So I would duck in the back seat until Dad would turn around and say something to me about it. And while I was asking everyone to let us in, I would be apologizing to the cars along the way. The other time Dad liked to embarrass me was when we would drive in the convertible with the top down, and he would do his impression of rap, which was horrendous, but also funny. He would always say to me, "How do you like this junk? I can't even understand what they're saying. It sounds like a bunch of gibberish." And lastly, what embarrassed me the most was when we would go to temple together. And probably 5 minutes into the service, Dad would whip out his cell phone and we'd be checking the sports scores. I always felt so mortified because you're not supposed to have your phone out during services. And it wasn't just during Shabbat, but it was during the high holidays. Thinking about it now, I shouldn't have cared because I realized that he was doing all that for me. He wasn't raised religiously, but he saw how passionate I was about Judaism. And even though he wasn't really interested in it himself, he still took me to Jewish day schools, Hebrew school, attended Shabbos dinners with me, went to temple, and allowed me to have a bat mitzvah. If that doesn't tell you how much he cared about me, then maybe this will. I knew our bat was special, but I never knew just how unique it was. A few days ago, I went to the bank, and I ran into Alma, who told me this story of my dad. What I didn't know was that she was also a patient of his and ended up delivering her. But she told me that she had to have a C-section, and that my dad said that he was going to pick a really special day to him. He told her that it was the best day of his life, and so she gave birth to her son on February 8th. And now we get to share the same birthday. Looking back on my life, I'm pretty sure that I was the luckiest one out of all my siblings, in the sense that I got to spend the most time with him. I got to grow up with him, live with him, and I was able to see him every day. He always showed up to everything, never missed a ballet or piano recital, school performance, basketball game, tennis match, or a teacher conference. Yet I still feel robbed because there are so many things that he is never going to see, that he can't be there for to support me. He will no longer be attending my college graduation. I brought a whole box with me. He won't get to see me succeed in my chosen career. He won't even get to meet my first boyfriend. But most importantly, he won't get to walk me down the aisle. All of my siblings were given the chance to either get into a relationship or get married and start their own families, whether or not they had kids, but I will not get that opportunity to share with my dad. He will not get to spend time with me or with my husband or meet my children. And I know that he would have been a great grandparent if he had been given the opportunity. He would have been there for my family, but more specifically my kids. He would have supported them and loved them the way that he did for me. He was also the only person who supported me when I decided that I wanted to work 2 jobs this summer, because he told me he just wanted me to be happy. I think my favorite thing about him was that he always showed me his emotions. I thought that this was something that he did to everyone, but after talking about it, I found that he never did this with my other siblings, and he never even did this with my mom. But he would cry with me. Sometimes we'd be at home, and sometimes we'd be sitting in the car in a parking lot somewhere, and he would cry with me because if I was sad, then he was sad too. The past 4 months have been like a roller coaster. There have been days where my dad was doing really great, and there were some days where he was not. This process was not just hard on him, but it was hard on my mom, and it was hard on me too. I remember that one day a few months ago, it had really started to hit me, and I began to struggle. So when I went to go visit him in his hospital room, I was being really quiet, and I wasn't saying anything, and he turned to me, and he was like, "Are you okay? Like, are you tired?" And I told him that I was fine, and he looked me in the eyes, and he said, "You're sad, aren't you?" I didn't even have to tell him how I was feeling. He already knew, but I nodded my head yes. And then he started to cry, and he was like, "Are you sad because of me? Am I making you sad?" And again, I nodded my head yes, and then I started to cry. And I told him that I was sad because I missed him. I missed having him at home with me. And that's when he promised me that he was going to get better, and he would come home because we were in this together, and he still needed to take care of Mom and I. My dad never broke his promises to me, except for his last. But I knew that it wasn't him who broke it, and that if he could stay here with us, he would. Reminds me of something he told me growing up, that eventually when the time came and he would no longer be with me, that it would be my responsibility to protect our family, that it would be my responsibility to take care of Mom. Sorry. Since this process has started, everyone has been asking me, "Oh, how are you feeling? How are you doing? Are you doing okay?" A few months ago, I could tell you that I was great. I could even tell you that I was happy. And that's because I had everything I ever needed. Everything that I ever wanted. I had a family. Can't see. Then I started to lose everyone that I love, and now I can't really figure out how I'm feeling. So when I'm asked, I always respond back, "Yeah, I'm fine, I'm good, everything's okay," which is also a very typical response that my dad would have said, even when things were not going well. And that's because my dad was a very optimistic person, always super positive, saw the good in everyone. And this is where I insert his famous line of, "At least it's not cancer." By that, he meant that you shouldn't sweat the small stuff, and those obstacles that you're creating are something that you can push through. There was nothing that my dad couldn't do except teach me how to ride a bike. I think I was outside with him for an hour to an hour and a half, and my mom came out to check on us to see how we were doing, and soon realized that even after all that time, he had only gotten me to sit on the bike with my feet on the ground. And at that point, my mom decided that it was her turn, and in about 10 to 15 minutes, I was riding up and down the street. I will forever miss going to games with him, listening to him when he went into full-blown history nerd, watching him drive with a cheeseburger in one hand and the wheel in the other. I will miss messing with him and hearing him tell me how annoying I am, or how he would go to the market and come back with things that we didn't need, or all the times that he went and he got everything completely wrong, or the game he used to play to get me to smile when I was upset. But mostly I'll miss his company and his endless calls just to ask me something silly. Almost there. I admired him not just because he was my dad, but because he was a good person. He would always go out of his way for others and help everyone that he could. And because of that, I'm not scared to move forward with my life. I'm not scared that I will forget him or that my future children will not get to know him because he lives within me. He lives in my smile, my laugh, my attitude, my jokes, and my personality. He has left me with his kindness, his contagious smile, his inappropriate sense of humor, and his big heart. He has raised me to be a good person, a friend, a daughter, and someday a good wife and mother. He has given me the best life because he provided everything for me. And I'm not just talking about materialistic items, even though he would constantly get me stuff. I mean, he gave me all of his love. I know that I will never get to have this kind of relationship with anyone else ever again, but I'm okay with that because there will never be anyone else like my dad. Our bond was one of a kind, and I couldn't imagine it sharing it with anyone else. He always used to tell me that I was his favorite, his number one, that he loved me the most, and that he didn't love anyone else the way that he loved me. I now understand what he meant. There was nothing that we wouldn't have done for each other, and there were no boundaries to our devotion to one another. You know, love never dies, and our love for each other was endless. I want to thank you all for coming here today to celebrate my dad's life. I know that he would have been really happy to see you all. He would have been happy to see us all together. Thank you.
And Brittany Page, just so you know, those moments that embarrassed you, that he was sitting in the sanctuary looking at the sports scores, he wasn't alone. I see all from up here. God, you give us loved ones and make them the strength of our life, the light of our eyes. They depart and leave us bereft on a lonely way. But you are the living fountain from which our healing flows. To you the stricken look for comfort and the sorrow-laden for consolation. I invite you all, please, if you are able now, to please stand for our memorial prayer, the El Malarachamim. El Malarachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanefei HaShekhinah, עם קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, את נשמת ברוך בן יוסף וחיה, שהלך לעולמו. בעל הרחמים, יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Barry Tishler, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us all say, Amen. And as we remain standing, I invite you, if you would like to turn to page 598 in the prayer books in front of you, to join together in the Mourner's Kaddish. Before we do so, I remind everyone that these words speak nothing of death or sadness, but only of God's greatness. And so as we read these words together in the original Aramaic, as we read these words together, we recognize the greatness of God in our lives, the healing ability, and the greatness of the gift that he gave us in the personage of Barry Tishler. Yitkadal ve'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach chirutei ve'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kari ve'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'lalmei almaya, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלום רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו Hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us, and to all Israel, and to all those who sit with God, to which we all say, Amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו, אמרו, אמן. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ladies and gentlemen, this does conclude our memorial service for Barry Tishler. As we are in a heightened sense of awareness for COVID-19 at this time, we do not allow any food or drink within the building, but we invite you to pick up some of Barry's extra special treats as you are exiting the building to the front. And if you would like to visit a little bit on our front patio, I know that that would mean a great deal to Ellen and Brittany Page and Brad, and to each other to be able to spend that time together. We do, however, have to vacate the building. So I thank you all for being here with us. And again, I invite you to pick up some treats on your way out and share some time together on the front patio. Thank you.